Well, hello and good day to everyone. For everyone being here, thank you so much for joining us for another webinar with the DNA Company. So today we are actually doing a little bit of a continuation of a wonderful webinar that I had the pleasure to do with AJ, our resident boomer nutritionist and in-house clinician as well. And we were talking before about gut health, brain health. How does this all work? The food you take in. And, there's so much really when it comes to gut health and how that impacts mood, behavior, overall health, your immune system, and everything else. So tonight, we are focusing on that gut-brain connection, specifically in the way that how your digestive health impacts your cognitive wellness. So it is my pleasure to have us be joined by, again, our resident boomer nutritionist, AJ Wilt, and, all of the loveliness, brilliance that she has, and how well she works with clients with the DNA Company and helps them in understanding their food, their diet, and how that impacts their overall health as well as their cognitive health. So why don't you come on and say hi, AJ?
Yes, I'm so excited to be here and to get to continue this conversation, right? Because gut, brain, we can talk about this for probably the next century, right? Especially as new science is coming out and we see these different research articles. And, that's where, Dr. Varden, I'm so excited each time I get to be on a call with you because as much as you have me here as an expert, yes, and diet and those sorts of things, I love getting to pick your brain too, right? So I'm just as excited because I get to ask my little questions and get some answers and see more of that scientific explanation, right? I'm excited to be here. I'm excited for our conversation today, and I just wanted to jump right off the bat. We think, okay, DNA company. What do we do? We look at DNA. What else do we do? We look at the gut, and why is that? Because they're incredibly important to our overall health. And, we can use so much of that information, right? So we're checking out the DNA. And when it relates to our gut, I'm curious, just to kind of get us started here. And I would love to hear from everyone that's watching. Have you had your DNA tested with us? Have you had any kind of DNA test? Because I think one of the first things, I don't know if you kind of can touch on it, but what about our DNA can affect our microbiome, right? If that's where, we can get these little gems of knowledge, what do we need to be looking at in that DNA 360 report, right? And I'm curious to see who has one, who doesn't have one. And again, also, it's always good to know like who's done the gut microbiome testing with us, right? The gut 360, because then we kind of know who we're talking to as far as like, okay, have you seen this? Are you familiar with it? Or do we need to give more explanation? So you feel free to throw that in the chat and let us know if you've had that or not. But anyway, so Dr. Varden, what about our DNA can affect our gut microbiome?
Well, that's a fantastic question, and a lot, actually. It's really interesting because a couple hours before we started this podcast, I got curious and was like, I'm aware that there's a lot of research that has been done on the gut brain axis and, in genetics. I mean, it is a cutting edge growing field both together. And so I had jumped into PubMed, just typed in gut brain, and really interesting, I got back over 18,500 research papers hits just talking about the gut brain, and which first of all tells you how important that connection is. All right.
Mhm.
But then when you really start tying in your genetics to it and saying, okay, so the gut being really important, the brain really important, the two together being even more important, and how we as a company look at the genes in a functional way, saying, okay, here's your genes, here's how they affect the gut, the brain, the two together. And we're going to be diving in and sprinkling some of this information throughout the talk. But if you have your DNA reports, your DNA 360, or if you're waiting on it, and when you get them and you can replay this webinar to kind of listen in again, to scroll through your reports and take a look. We have a mood and behavior section that covers a handful of genes, specifically those related to three major neurotransmitters that are extremely important when it comes to memory, to mood, specifically dopamine, serotonin, noradrenaline, adrenaline, okay? And the receptors that are related to them. These are the genes that we're talking about, are the genes like the DRD2 gene, that's DRD2, that tells us what the density of dopamine receptors you are genetically predisposed to having. How easily do you feel that pleasure and reward when dopamine, that neurotransmitter, attaches to that receptor? So that gives us a lot of information. And then, of course, how quickly is it cleared? For the serotonin neurotransmitter, okay, this gives us like our happiness, as well as our ability to organize and prioritize incoming stimuli. So there's two particular genes that we focus on there, the TPH2 gene, which looks at how well are we actually producing serotonin, genetically speaking, because microbiome plays a huge part in that too. But also how well are we transporting serotonin, and that's our 5-HTTLPR gene. So again, a lot of really good information. And then our ADRA2B gene deals with the noradrenaline, adrenaline receptor, and how you work with stress, how impactfully you feel those stressful moments, and then how you replay them, how you remember those. So that's a very strong and impactful section of our DNA 360 reports that are very reflective on what we're talking about tonight and what we're going to be discussing. But also there are sprinklings of information on the gut, like your glutathione conjugation pathway, the GST genes, specifically GSTM1. This impacts your gut health. How it gives us an idea on how your gut biome, the diversity, the population, is it a decent terrain to work with, genetically speaking, or we might need to look into that a little bit more to give it some support to help with, your gut biome. The FUT2 gene, that also works in there. That particular one you'll find in your reports for anti-inflammation. And then there are others for diet and nutrition that are obviously very, very important because of the way that we process the foods that we actually take in. And, so we'll get into that a little bit more when we start diving into more of the science behind it and how all of this works.
Safe to say, I'm playing a little bit of devil's advocate here, right? Where I'm kind of like, okay, because yes, maybe I know the answers to some of these questions, but at the same time, I like to kind of break it down where it's like easy to understand. So you're telling me that based on my genetics, right? And I've done the DNA test, and it's been a great, thing for me to discover and know. Wish I would have had it a long time ago. But then I could figure out if my issue might be, oh, I really need to work on the serotonin, oh, maybe I need to lean in more into this like dopamine, or maybe I'm having a harder time with some of these toxins, right? Because every single good thing for the gut isn't going to need to be the top priority for each person, is what I'm kind of gathering, is that like based on our DNA, we can kind of almost begin to prioritize how we treat our gut microbiome and how we need to kind of work on those alterations that are going to best support us genetically, you know. Does that kind of make sense?
Oh
Does that
yeah.
work? Okay,
And
so
and
that's
here's
what.
the thing though, is that our DNA is only one piece of the puzzle.
Mhm,
That is the basis, the blueprint of which we first work off of. But you have your nature nurture
mhm.
aspect. So DNA being your nature, well, now the nurture, what have you been exposed to? What is your lifestyle? How were you born? Did you have a lot of antibiotics as a child? What kind of toxins were you exposed to, that could impact your gut health? So it is the DNA itself, and the 360 reports are a piece of the puzzle, a very important piece of the puzzle. But then we also have to know what else is going on. What currently are you dealing with in your life? The stresses, what foods are you eating? What are you exposed to? But then there's also, because that can be subjective and objective, because also we want to know how do you feel? you know uh, do you have brain fog? Are you forgetting some things? There's a lot to be looked at there. But then there's also the objective data of, let's take a look at what is your gut microbiome population. What's the diversity? What species do you have in there? Because we've got good beneficial bacteria, we've got bad pathogenic bacteria, we have others that are just hanging around. I mean, there's trillions of them in there. And to be able to get a sampling and taking a look and say, what are we actually working with?
Yeah.
And going, okay, then based on what that is, and these are through like gut biome tests. We happen to have and offer our gut 360 test. So we can actually take a look at that. So that can tell us, okay, what are we working with? Where do we need to support? What kind of probiotics might be needed? What prebiotics, which is the food that these probiotics need. Obviously, we want to feed the good guys, not the bad guys. Okay, starve out the bad guys. And how else can we support? And there are so many different ways that we can do that. But first, we need to know, what are we working with? What hand of cards have we been dealt, not just genetically, but currently, what is our status? So, always getting that baseline. Where are we starting? So that way, when you actually put in the work, make the changes, or are working with someone like myself or AJ, you want to be able to know, did what I just do even do anything? How have I changed this? So we've got to have a baseline first. Obviously, your genetics do not change. They are not diagnostic. They just tell you what that unchanging, what do you have to work with? But it gives us the spectrum on, kind of like when I've talked about before, that genes aren't just like an on off switch. It's like a dimmer switch. You can up regulate, down regulate, make them brighter, make them dimmer. Okay. So it's, what do you have to work with? All right.
Mhm.
And then, what can we do to make some changes?
So
So
as we kind was gonna say, as we kind of get into some of these, these conversations, and I know that sometimes when we're used to having these conversations a lot, we use words and phrases that other people might be like, what's that? So, gut brain axis. I'm curious if you can put in the chat, have y'all heard that term? And if you have heard it, is it like, oh, I just kind of pick up on context clues and I think I have a vague understanding of it? Or do you really feel that you understand that connection and what that gut brain axis is, right? Because when we have these talks, not only do we want to share information, but we want to do so with a vernacular and in a way and with the explanation so that you can track along, right? We want everyone tracking along and understanding it, so it's not like we're Just, yeah, see right here, Mary says she's not aware of the term. So if we start talking, oh, gut-brain axis, they shouldn't be like, excuse me, can we just hold on a minute and someone explain what is, Dr. Barton, that gut-brain axis? What are we even talking about?
Well, I'll tell you, B in the chat just said it's the interaction between the enteric system and the central nervous system. Beautiful. Love that. Yes. Now, what for those of you who haven't heard of the term, they're like, okay,
So
what's
now what's enteric? Yeah.
what's the central nervous system? Okay. So when we're saying enteric, that is your gut. Your gut is actually innervated, meaning it's got a crap load of nerves. Okay. A bunch of nerves in the gut. And it's really interesting because I tell clients this during their sessions that there are actually 10 to 15 times more neuronal connections, information transfer going from the gut to the brain than there is the brain to the gut. Our gut is considered our second brain. And the central nervous system is the brain. It's the brain and spinal cord. That's central. Okay. And then the peripheral nerves, is our peripheral nervous system. So there is a direct connection between the gut, the enteric nervous system, and our central nervous system, the brain. And that is exactly what we're going to be talking about and diving more into. So I'm so glad to see, a lot of people I'm seeing, yep, heard of it, vague understanding, heard some of the mechanisms or is somewhat understanding of it, talking about inflammation. Yes. So beautiful. And I'm glad we have a fairly well-informed audience. But this is something that even if you're not, this is why I'm sure that you have come to learn more. And that's what we want, is for that continued learning. So talking about the that gut-brain connection. So it's like, yeah, okay, so it's connected. Well, how do all of these trillions of, bacteria and fungi and everything else, what exactly do they do? Just take a little train and jump up there and what's going on? Well, really what it comes down to is the metabolites, the byproducts that the microbiome, these gut bacteria, make from the food that we eat. Okay. So we eat food, gets into our gut, and the microbes start continuing to break it down. Well, as they break it down, the result of that, they're called metabolites. They actually have a chemical reaction in the body. Now, specifically what it's doing is they are making short chain fatty acids. Now, I'm sure many of you have heard of medium chain fatty acids or medium chain triglycerides. Okay. That's a big thing, the coconut oil and, oh, these are really good, ketones and, we want to, help the brain. Yes. Okay. So those are the medium chain fatty acids or, but now we're looking at the short chain. So medium chain are more like, and this works into chemical structure and how many carbons you have and, getting into your chemistry class from high school or college. And so when we're talking about medium chain fatty acids, we're talking that it has 6 carbon chains or more. Well, actually it goes up to about 13 is your medium chain. And then there's long chain. I'm talking about short chain fatty acids. So we're talking, 1, 2, 3, 4 carbons in there. And these are really important because what they do is the microbiome, these bacterium, they break down the food, these dietary fibers, which are very crucial for brain health, because these molecules, and I'm sure you'll hear different terms about what short chain fatty acids are, or like the names, for example, like acetate, propionate, butyrate. That's a big one. Butyrate is often highlighted for its anti-inflammatory properties. It's really, really important for maintaining the integrity of the blood-brain barrier. Okay, we don't want to have a lot of stuff getting into our brain and messing things up. So it's very, very tight in there. Very few things are allowed. Well, these short chain fatty acids are allowed because they're small enough to pass that blood-brain barrier. And that really helps with regulating inflammation, within our brain, within that central nervous system, which directly acts and promotes neurotrophic factors like brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which we want, which is actually one of the things that we go over in our DNA reports and our mood and behavior, because that helps with neuroplasticity. How well are you learning new things?
So real quick,
yeah.
you just said that the food we eat goes in, gets into our gut, it gets digested, and we create these metabolites. And those metabolites then have a direct effect and get absorbed into the brain and can cause inflammation or keep inflammation down. So right there, the food we're eating, the gut is doing something that's directly affecting potential inflammation in my brain.
Oh,
So I
absolutely.
mean, it's not even some like vague communication or something that's like we eat daily. I mean, unless we're fasting, right? Multiple times a day. So this interaction is happening constantly, right? I mean, we are constantly affecting our, cognitive health, our brain health, right? By what we're putting in our stomach, like every time we eat a
And
meal.
and I'll tell you, this is not just conjecture or us just going, oh, well, yeah, of course. No, there are scientific studies showing this. There was a recent study published in Molecular Psychiatry in 2021, where they did a study that highlights the production of these short chain fatty acids by gut microbes. And it really looked at the role in strengthening the blood-brain barrier that I was just telling you about reducing that neuroinflammation, about supporting cognitive health. So, I mean, that's just one. There's another one in the journal Nutrients. It's also a 2021 study. And that research actually reviewed those interactions between the microbiota, gut, brain, and it really got into detailing how the microbial composition affects brain function, affects your behavior through the modulation or the ability to change, increase, decrease, okay, the neurotransmission. And what I mean by neurotransmission, this is the neurotransmitters, serotonin, dopamine, noradrenaline, things like that. When they are passed from neuron to neuron, which are the cells in the brain, in the nervous system, okay, when they are transmitted from the neuron to neuron, that's called neurotransmission. So it actually can affect how quickly, how well, how effectively that is done. That these short chain fatty acids that the microbiota directly affect that. So I'm telling you that, like I said, over 18,000 studies,
Which is
that.
crazy. And so Susan put a good question, I think, in the chat here. She said, is that always happening or only when you have a leaky gut? Now, so there is a difference between having a leaky gut, right? And maybe you can explain and give a little bit of clarity on that, because we do want short chain fatty acids, right? We do want that going to our brain. That is a positive interaction that we're having between the gut and the brain, right? Whereas leaky gut is something that is different than that.
I will say though, it is that if you have a leaky gut, you probably have a leaky brain. And there are associations of gut issues, IBS, and other severe gut problems, colitis, and issues in brain function. For example, brain fog and, memory decline, etc. So there has been also plenty of studies that have been done that have looked at the two in conjunction. So but it is important that certain metabolites, that certain things, yes, we do want crossing the blood-brain barrier, but they are usually very, very small. We don't want large proteins. We don't want a lot of junk in there. So that's why, like, the tight junctions that you find in your gut doesn't leak out these larger molecules that can end up, wreaking havoc and causing infections and inflammation in the body. And like I said, it's the same type of thing for the brain. The whole system is very tightly regulated, no pun intended, but it is balanced. It's just when we start, making it imbalanced due to a high toxic load, or chronic inflammation and issues due to poor dietary habits, or, not getting your body, keeping it in a healthier way, that can start that decline. Because usually when it comes to cognitive decline, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, diabetes, all of these things, these do not come on overnight. They are years and decades in the making. So
Yes.
it's just that kind of end product.
Yes, and that's where, especially the populations that I work with a lot, boomers, and a lot of times people go through life and we're able to abuse our bodies to a certain extent, right? Before we start noticing those things. That's exactly right. It's starting to accumulate through the years, and then all of a sudden now we're experiencing some memory loss, or experiencing something, and we want to do, we want to take action, right? And so that's where kind of getting into these practical tips. Okay, what can we do? How do we, what does the science say is a useful strategy for, combating these different things? And, it's never too late, right? And so we have our DNA, to give us our foundation and help us, but then kind of what are some of these, different focuses that we can have, on, to help improve our cognitive health, help improve our gut health. Kind of what are your thoughts in that area?
Well, I'll tell you that, really when we are talking about, overall health, it's interesting that Hippocrates, like what, over 2000 years ago, said, really all disease starts in the gut. So, I do have to say that I got a little distracted because I noticed a great question that I think will also lead into this, but I do want to comment on. Is Dirk had asked, why does leaky gut cause a leaky brain? And that's a great question. And for us to really understand about the things that you're asking, like, what do we do in general, and how does all of this work, to really get down a little bit more microscopically, going, okay, leaky gut, well, how does this work? And then we can start backing up and go, how do we either prevent, or how do we fix these issues? And so to answer that question, a couple of things. The intestinal barrier, when we're talking about leaky gut, and I had mentioned about tight junctions, and a lot of times, well, the intestinal lining, I should say, is normally a very selective barrier. It controls what enters the bloodstream from the gut. And at times that becomes compromised because of high sugar, inflammation, things that end up breaking down those tight junctions. And it is that condition that is referred to as leaky gut, okay? Because it is allowing substances like toxins, like these microbes. We want to keep them in the gut, not, inside the body, meaning like outside of the digestive system. It can allow undigested food particles to escape into the bloodstream, which obviously can affect the brain because your blood is being circulated all over the place. going in areas that they normally wouldn't be allowed to go. Also, inflammation. When you are talking about inflammation, especially systemic inflammation, very different than acute. If you scratch yourself, injure yourself, it'll become red and inflamed, and that's localized inflammation due to an acute injury. We're talking systemic. So we are talking about particular leakage of harmful substances into the blood that can trigger that systemic inflammation. And it is due to these proteins called cytokines that end up crossing into areas of the body, that they wouldn't normally go. And when I had mentioned about that blood-brain barrier, that again, it's very, very tightly controlled. And it's very sensitive to these inflammatory signals, these cytokines that I was telling you about. And when that reaches the brain, the cerebral environment, your head, that can induce changes in that blood-brain barrier, making it more permeable. And that's where the leaky brain comes in. And this can work into like the neuroinflammation, causing effects neurologically, that mood swings and, forgetfulness and lethargy and fatigue. So that's really, how that connection more intimately works. But getting into the gut microbiota itself and how that influences, these neurotransmitters. Because let's go, okay, so now we know how leaky gut, leaky brain, and, the association of these short chain fatty acids, that are made by the microbiota. Well, first of all, which gut bacterium are we talking about? What are the ones that are most impactful? Like, if any of you actually in the chat real quick, have you done a gut biome test, whether it's ours, the Gut 360, or some other test? Please just put yes or no if you've done a gut biome test. So when you're looking at those, of course, depending on which test you've had and what they offer, what information they offer, there are several like ours that provide what species, what phyla, the families of bacterium and fungi are found in your gut. And when we're talking about those that work into creating serotonin through the tryptophan pathway and other neurotransmitters, we are talking about bacterium like the Streptococcus, Enterococcus, Escherichia. These are gut bacteria that actually synthesize serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, okay, in the gut. Well, we want these things. We want those. Now, I'm sure some of you are like, Escherichia. Well, that is a higher family for E. coli. Well, wait a minute, E. coli, we don't want that because it makes us sick. I remember seeing earlier in the chat, someone had mentioned that, well, bad bacteria, we don't want to get rid of all of them. Is it good to have some of them? Absolutely it is. We always have some E. coli. We just don't want them getting out of hand. They're like little hooligans that if there's only a few, they can be under control. You get them in a big group, forget about it. They're gonna, cause a ruckus, and it's just, they get a little out of hand when they get together. So we want to keep the numbers down because again, they do actually do some beneficial things. It's just when they become too plentiful, then they can cause issues. So, but there
So
are.
I don't want to sterilize my gut of,
No.
and pardon my rearranging in here. The sun is setting and I was like, oh, this is getting a little bright. So we've rearranged a little bit different here with the desk. But so you're like, we don't want to just sterilize all the bad guys. I mean, I thought, we were into this whole sterilization thing, and that's kind of good, right? To be like uber clean and only have all the good guys. So we
No,
need some balance. Okay. So we need an
absolutely.
antagonist. Okay. Just
Yes.
checking. Okay.
Yes. So, I mean, the thing is that, there's a whole family of good gut bacteria, and there's also a whole family of pathogenic, but there's still an ideal range of which you want them in. So some, good gut bacteria, we're talking about like lactobacillus, and bifidobacterium, different species like that you will often find in probiotics. Akkermansia is a really big one now, that a lot of people are hearing about and starting to use because of the GLP-1, working with semi-glutides, and that's really what semi-glutides, like, the Mongiorno, and a lot of these diet uh, peptides and other drugs are focusing on, is that GLP-1 protein that actually Akkermansia helps to naturally upregulate. And basically what GLP-1 does is it just turns off your hunger. Kind of like when you're filling up a gas tank, when you've got the thing in there, and then it clicks when your gas tank is full. Well, that's like GLP-1. It clicks when your stomach is full. Okay. And some people, that's dysregulated, so they keep eating and eating and are seemingly very hungry. So Akkermansia is a keystone species, meaning it is one of those species that we want in the gut that does a lot of really good things. So it's not just working on the GLP-1 upregulation, it also produces mucin, because Akkermansia mucinophilia, where that actually helps to better the gut integrity, the tight junctions. It actually helps in gut repair.
Yeah.
So, the species do a lot of wonderful things. There's also another family called Bacteroidetes. This is really important to help with plant metabolism. There's Firmicutes that helps with fat metabolism. There's even the Ascomycota, which is a fungal group that really is very critical in inflammation, a balance of inflammatory and anti-inflammatory effects. So it's knowing, okay, again, what do you have currently in your gut? And with some of the pathogenic Candida, I've got a lot of clients with high Candida. Candida loves sugar, and I'll tell you, they're going to make you crave sugar.
Yes, they
So
will.
this is what I was talking about earlier on. We want to feed the good guys, not the bad guys. So, Candida, although we're always going to have a little bit, when they start, getting too many and making you crave the sugar, if you keep eating, the starches and the sugary foods and everything else, you're feeding the bad guys. All right.
Yeah.
Where the good guys, okay, so, our Bacteroidetes, our Lactobacillus, our, Akkermansia, this is where the fiber comes in. Your complex carbohydrates, your, those prebiotics, okay, the food for the good guys. And I would love to have you talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so, well, and when we get into the discussion of food, and even when we're talking about probiotics, I want to say Denise here, she says in the chat, what's good in one person can be bad in others. And it's very true, right? So whenever we talk about foods that are, say, supportive of a healthy microbiome, it doesn't mean you need to eat every single one of those foods that we list, because maybe some of those foods are not ideal for you. Whenever we talk about these different bacteria that live in our gut, and, oh, well, there's all these different bacteria. Okay, I'm going to get this probiotic and that probiotic. I'm going to just take them. In some people, those certain bacteria can cause issues, right? So I'm someone who deals with histamine intolerance. So when we talk about, oh, how do we have a healthy gut microbiome? eat fermented foods. That is the absolute worst advice for someone like me, right? I've been down that road where I'm like, oh, I have a leaky gut. I'm going to fix everything when I fix my gut, and I'm going to eat kimchi by the gallon every day, and I'm going to be amazing, right? And health is going to be fantastic. Well, then I just start feeling worse and worse and worse and worse, and I can't figure it out. Oh, then we discover this whole histamine intolerance thing. I take out the fermented foods. I put in probiotics that are supportive of me personally and my health. I feel amazing, right? And so all of these little things we'll talk about, foods that we'll talk about, they aren't necessarily for everyone, right? But if you find some that you feel really good on, well, let's lean into that, right? Our body does communicate to us, and this is where, you know, you kind of have to have that idea of intuitive eating, right? Listen to your body, right? If your
I am
heart
going to
rate
give a
goes,
little pushback on that, just a little bit. Okay.
okay,
And the reason I say that is we have to be careful to intuitive eating, because like I told you about candida, they will make you crave sugar.
true,
So if you intuitively like, oh, I want that cookie, I want that, pie, I
okay.
want that, obviously you don't want
Yes,
to lean
not
into
indulgent. Yes,
that.
not indulgent intuitive eating, not comfort eating. Okay, so we're going to give a little distinction there. We don't want to lean into the comfort eating, right? And oh, I crave this and I like this, but more of a, I am making healthy decisions. Okay, I'm choosing the fruits and veggies, I am choosing the grains, but for some reason, when I eat the oats, I don't feel very well. But when I have, say, the buckwheat, I feel wonderful for breakfast, right? So it's more of an intuition with the healthy foods, right? Yeah. So not condoning to intuitively eat Twinkies, not the intuition I'm leaning into here. So, but yes, one of the things, especially when we talk about short chain fatty acids, since you had mentioned those in the beginning of our talk. Well, one thing that I always like to bring to the attention of clients are resistant starches, right? So resistant starches are something that are going to help you increase that short chain fatty acid, increases how many you have, right? Helps the gut out. And so people are like, well, where do I get those, right? How do I get short chain fatty acids in my diet? And sometimes it's as simple as cooking rice, not eating it right away, refrigerating it, and eating it. You can reheat it again, but whenever you go through that cook, the same with potatoes, you go through it, it's cooked, and then it cools all the way down. Resistant starches are created within those foods. And so think of your Sunday meal prep, right? How can I prep some potatoes? How can I prep some rice? And it's going to be my lunch during the week, right? Whether those are going to be my carb sources, my starch sources, maybe. Not to say that we're going to overload on them, but those resistant starches that are created now, whether you eat that as a cold meal, right, or you warm it back up, you've now just naturally increased the resistant starch content of that food. You eat it, and it's a good thing for your gut. So there's these really simple things that we can add into our daily meals to help give us.
I want to dovetail off of the starch resistant rice,
Okay.
because several years ago, I came across a paper and a recipe on making the starch resistant rice, because you can make it even more starch resistant, not just sticking it in the fridge, but actually when you're cooking it, to cook it with coconut oil.
Well,
Then what you do, put it in the fridge, let it cool completely, then you can reheat it. Now, here's the science behind it. What they found in this particular study is that when you cook it with the coconut oil, that it actually will infuse into the rice. Then when you chill it, it actually creates like a crystallization of the starch, making it more starch resistant. And you can reheat it, but the crystallization stays. And it's said to reduce the starch absorbability by 40%. And they were still doing research. It was like, oh, this is so cool. Yeah. So there actually is, I've seen recipes out there for starch resistant rice, but that is really wonderful. And oh, Teresa, you're allergic to coconuts. That's the particular fat that they used. I'm not sure if you can just use any fat, like a butter. Obviously, you don't want to use anything that is like inflammatory, like some of
You could
the
try ghee. I would suggest using ghee because that can also help with the
I,
short chain
yeah,
fatty
and
acid.
I'm not saying that using ghee or butter or something wouldn't do it. It's just that the research that they did, that they actually measured this, was using the coconut oil. So I just wanted to throw that out there because, again, there is science behind this. And, these are the numbers, which I love because I'm a total geek about it. Anyway, I've got a question to throw out to people. So in the chat, answer, if you can reflect on a time when you changed your diet and it affected your mood, your cognitive abilities, for example, like your ability to focus or memory, and I'm talking either good or bad. Okay, has anybody ever changed their diet and noticed a difference in their mood or their ability to focus or, their memory? Throw that in. Say yes or no. And yes, oh my goodness, yes, absolutely. I'll tell you what, yeah, when I eat chocolate, that's fantastic, Carol.
Oh my God,
I
that
love
is a
chocolate.
joke in our family with my grandmother. Love you, Grams, if you ever watch this. But it was a rule, like, don't give Grams chocolate because all of a sudden mood changed. It was like, you're a different person. And it was a direct gut to brain thing. And it happened like that every time she ate the chocolates. That is hilarious. I believe you, Carol.
Oh yeah, but I'll tell you, chocolate for me actually makes me very happy.
Aw.
I like the dark chocolate personally, because it has the high cacao count, and which is very anti-inflammatory, and great magnesium. And so yeah,
Mhm.
I mean, it really depends. And obviously based on your genetics, based on your gut biome, foods will react differently to you. And not just from person to person, but if you eat something, that bloats you up and just makes you feel like crap, doesn't mean that that same food will do so after you heal your gut. But that's part of that healing process. But I'll tell you what, how about after a Thanksgiving meal and you eat lots of turkey and you feel like you're going into a food coma?
We love the food coma, right? I thought it was just a part of the experience. Are you telling me my gut microbiome might have something to do with that?
Absolutely. That's your
So could I get
tryptophan
through
pathway.
Thanksgiving? Oh, wow. So what happens when I'm going into like the food coma versus the person who's like, oh, let's go walk and do all these things after the meal? And it's like, what? Like, what's the difference in our gut? What's going
Well,
on?
that actually is the tryptophan pathway because the turkey is high in tryptophan,
Mhm.
which happens to be an amino acid. And that gets turned into serotonin. And, there's other neurotransmitters that are going on. But one of the things is that, we're happy, we're calm, we're chill, and we end up being more, and we start getting tired because remember, serotonin and melatonin, that interaction. So you start increasing the melatonin, hey, we're getting tired. So, and when you get that overload, because most people don't eat that much turkey, normally they
Yeah.
kind of gorge themselves at Thanksgiving. But there is the perfect example, of where food, your gut microbiome, making these metabolites, affecting neurotransmitter production and how it is affecting your brain, your mood, your thoughts. And I will tell you, I know, being in grad school and everything, when I would eat, if I had fried foods, say
Mhm.
we went out for a burger and fries or something, oh my gosh, my brain was not as sharp. It just was, it took more energy to try to focus, to process information. And especially when I was doing late nights, you know, and studying, pulling all-nighters, that didn't give my gut biome a chance to clean up and do its rest. which
And then,
affected my energy level.
when we talk about how long the food takes, right, from the moment we eat it until it's expelled, that can take some time, right? Like it spends a decent amount of time in our body. We call that our transit time, as funny as it may sound, right? We're not talking about public transit, we're talking about the transit in your, through you. Um, and, sometimes when we're like, oh, we eat a food, we don't necessarily, it's not like, oh, I ate this food and then I felt stupid for like, 2 minutes. Now I did see someone in here say, and I'd have to go back and find it as the comments are going, which is like, I ate a bunch of carrots. I was dumb for a day. Like it really happened. And, stuff like that can happen. We can have like instant kind of reactions with some of our food, but can the food affect us where we've eaten it and we maybe don't notice the brain fog or we don't notice anything until a couple days later?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
Okay.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Because remember that, it takes time for that process of breaking down food and transit time, like you were talking about. When you first eat food to when you're actually excreting it out into the toilet,
Mhm.
that is your transit time. And that can be anywhere from like 16, and this is normal, okay, because I know some people, might get diarrhea or just have some bad and it comes out real fast. But we're talking normally between 16 to 36 hours. Okay.
Mhm.
So therefore, all during that time, it's going through your intestines. I mean, you've got a lot of intestines going on. There's, a lot of microbes that are working on those pieces of food. And, when they are making their metabolites, and then when it is, going through the bloodstream, through the body, getting to the brain, it's that process. And yes, that can stretch out over several hours and even a day or two. So absolutely, you will have that delayed response. I mean, like I was saying, eating fried foods and foods that are inflammatory, um, it will affect the systemic inflammation that I had mentioned earlier in the webinar. And it will take a little bit longer for that to clear, for you to
Yeah.
recover. So, this is really something to be aware of. Doing a food journal is very, very important.
Yes.
So knowing and associating how the food you eat make you feel. So we are coming to the top of the hour. And
Yes.
I know that we have some questions in our Q&A box. And, I did see a question that I will kick off in the chat. And that was, someone had mentioned about fasting, that they felt very sharp when
I
they were
saw that one.
fasting.
I'm glad you're
And
going to
I
talk about
think
it.
that is really important to touch on
Yeah.
because you're absolutely right. And how does this happen? Well, when we fast, first of all, we're giving our gut biome a break. We're letting
Mhm.
them rest. They're not having to give off, metabolites or anything else. And then you're probably wondering, but we need the neurotransmitters. Well, we're still making neurotransmitters. Granted, 90% of your serotonin is made in the digestive tract. But when this person was mentioning about having their brain sharper when they're fasting, I have noticed it too. Absolutely. And what it does is it increases the brain derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF. I mentioned this earlier in the webinar. This is the molecule that helps with neuroplasticity, how quickly you learn. Okay. And that connections, what fires together, wires together. And what ends up happening is that fasting increases BDNF, and this encourages that growth of the new neurons, of these synapses, the transmission between the neurons. And therefore, higher levels of BDNF are associated with improved memory, improved learning, improved overall cognitive functioning. Fasting also promotes autophagy. self-eating of the cells. So basically, we're clearing out the old worn out cells and getting rid of those damaged parts and allowing these new younger cells to come up. So we're getting rid of the debris and maintaining this efficient functioning cells that are left, that are there. And this really helps in protecting against neurodegeneration, working into neurodegenerative diseases. And obviously, by doing that, we are enhancing that cognitive performance. And then obviously, this works into reducing any oxidative stress, any inflammation, because you're not producing it. So therefore, that's able to lower that that stress, that metabolic stress on the brain. And of course, anytime that you are improving your metabolic health, you are reducing your blood sugar level, you're increasing your insulin sensitivity, and therefore improving your energy levels. So, I mean, there's so many different aspects, and going into ketosis, and, there's a lot of, benefits when it comes to fasting.
And I do always like to kind of throw in there with the fasting bit. It is beneficial, no doubt. I mean, Dr. Varden, you just gave great examples of that. But I do always like to caution, right? Once we get to where we are metabolically flexible, once we get to where our body is easily able to kind of switch between that fat metabolism versus the sugar metabolism, and we're reaping those benefits. We hear about these intermittent fasting things, or people fasting for long periods of time, and those have their place. But at the same time, more is not always better when we get into the fasting discussion. And you can end up really causing your body a lot of stress, right? If you continue past what is a beneficial, time period for fasting, right? And there's even times, women, we have a cycle, we need to take a lot of different things into account, so that we aren't, say, causing a bunch of cortisol spikes because we're trying to really push ourselves through a fast, right? So just keep that in mind, right? Because then you can start going the other direction if you're kind of overusing like the fasting hack or that fasting way of lifestyle. So I always just like to caution, don't get too carried away, and use as needed, but don't be afraid of opening up, say, your eating window or shortening your fasting times as you become healthier.
So I see a couple other questions here that I thought that you would be wonderful to answer. And Alina was asking, what are your thoughts on meat and how it affects healing our leaky gut or inflammation?
So,
So go ahead.
okay, my big thing is there is no like holy grail one thing that's going to like fix it all, right? So eating meat, should animal protein be a part of your diet? In my opinion, yes. Okay. From just a nutritional perspective, when we're talking about, say, you have a very compromised gut, digestion is hard, you're not absorbing nutrients very well. Okay. If you're already not digesting well, what does it mean? It means every piece of food that goes into your mouth needs to have as many nutrients as possible. What is the most nutrient dense food? It's going to be animal products, right? Eggs, animal meats, those sorts of things. And so, in my opinion, when you're trying to heal and at least just give your body a fighting chance, you do need those products. You need those vitamins. You need that. That protein also helps. We are protein, right? Like we need those amino acids that come from that animal protein to help us to repair and rebuild our own body. So there's definitely a great, I'm trying to think, oh, what is her name? There's a book, I think it's Gut and Psychology Syndrome or something like that. Oh, what is her name? I cannot think of it right now, Doctor. I'll have to look it up. But,
Okay.
She talks about, right, using meat, using broths, using those sorts of things to help heal the gut, right? And then it directly affecting the brain, right? So it's a great resource if you can just kind of look up that book. But I would say, yes, it is important, but also something that we have to think about is when you're eating that animal protein, if you aren't digesting it well, if it's making you feel uncomfortable, look at what you're eating. Can you handle chicken? Can you handle beef? I mean, I don't know. Like, are you better with fish? Where can you get it? What's your source that you can digest? And do you need to bring along a digestive enzyme, right? Because there's things that we can take to support the digestion of the food that we need during this gut healing process. So maybe that was a really long answer.
And
Sorry, but yeah.
well, no, but that's important. But when also an aspect when it comes to meat, okay, especially red meat, as she's asking, is well, actually, no, she specifically said meat, but is what's it from? I mean, is it a grass-fed and finished cow as compared to that in these feeding lots? Because there's a difference in each, simply because one has more toxins, antibiotics, and other things. And if we are consuming that, that's what we're putting in our system as compared to the happy, healthy cow, with better meat. But it's also in the preparation. How are we preparing it? Are you charring it? Are you adding carcinogens and more toxic chemicals, in the way that you are preparing it, which could impact your anti-inflammatory profile in your DNA? One of the things that we look at is how well can you remove the toxins from your body? And if you are introducing a bunch of toxins with that, that's going to impact your gut. So that's something we look at. But also when we're talking about the gut biome and meat, there's something called TMAO, trimethylamine N oxide. And this is a compound that's actually produced in the liver during digestion of nutrients that are rich in like choline, lecithin, L-carnitine. These things are found in red meat, in eggs, and dairy products. And that's why some of those studies that are like, oh, these are bad and everything. And no, it's just, first of all, where does it come from? But also it's the gut bacteria, because there are certain gut bacteria that end up producing more of that particular byproduct. And, so there are actually some specific strains of gut bacteria that are involved in that trimethylamine production, like Firmicutes. They're actually in groupings with Clostridium and Anaerococcus is another one, but also proteobacteria. These are often, this family, phylum, is generally higher when you have a lot of inflammation. By the way, this is something we can look at, and which tells us when you do our Gut 360 test. I can actually see that and see where you are in that spectrum. But these particular species, increase that the TMA, trimethylamine, which can cause these issues, which would make you have higher inflammation and leaky gut. So we just have to come at it in several different ways, not just going, oh, is meat good or bad to eat? That's a very tricky question to answer, a very loaded question.
It is. And it's like, we want to give things that are actionable and simple, but then we also have to say, with the caveat that we are all completely different and we have to approach things very individually. And that's where I get back into my intuitive eating, right? Okay, I know I need the animal protein. She does great on beef. I do better with lamb, right? And that's fine. Just sort it out, right? And just kind of listen to your body. A couple of these questions here, I feel like a couple of these can be kind of all answered together in the Q&A area. So Lydia, she's saying, if bad, can your gut bacteria population be changed to be more beneficial? Well, I mean, we have a Gut 360 test that if we take it and we have a result, and then we make some changes and we take it again and we have a different result. I feel like this kind of, Dirk's question, he's basically asking if stomach acid kills the bacteria, the probiotics, then don't we need a colon transplant, fecal transplant, not a colon transplant, fecal transplant to, sometimes we might wish we had a whole nother colon, but until then, we'll go with fecal. Transplants. But anyways, does it, you know, can you really make a difference with the probiotics? I feel like what have you seen?
Yeah,
Did have
actually, yeah, if I can step in on that particular question, because that's a great question.
yeah.
It's like, okay, probiotics are putting it in our mouths, we are swallowing it, it's going in our stomach. Our stomach is extremely acidic, which
Mhm.
it's supposed to be. Actually, we
Yeah.
want it to be. So how does that not kill the probiotics in these pills? And the thing is that when you have a really good company and they do what they should be doing, they actually put a protective coating on that to get through the stomach. So it does make it to the intestines unadulterated, meaning that it's not going to be broken down and where they die. Now, you're always going to have some die off. They incorporate this into that, and that's why they have a very, very high, like, 5 billion, uh, colony forming units, CFUs,
Mhm.
so, but they will, like, oh gosh, I mean, there's so many out there. And I will say I'm not affiliated, as far as with these, but like Seed, they actually have a double casing where they put food for that bacterium in the capsule as well. But it's special enteric coated so that way it can get through, and then right there it has the food for them to feed them so they can grow. Microbiome Labs does the same thing, a little bit differently. It's because that's a proprietary setup that Seed has, but the Pendulum does the same thing. And I've listened to several seminars and interviews by them where they explain how they get that. I mean, which is really important,
Yes.
because if you're repopulating your gut, you want to make sure that they get to there. But also making sure that you eat the foods that help to repopulate, what you already have. Remember,
Yeah.
feeding the good guys, which is some of the things that we were, talking about. So what are the foods? And I know that we've already talked about some of them.
Mhm.
So I think we could even throw out a couple of foods that you can eat as we are answering some of these other questions. Because, like we said, with these, issues, toxicities that lower the good gut bacteria. So what kind of dietary impacts can help cognitive function, gut health? Um, One of them being fatty fish,
Mhm.
salmon, mackerel, sardines, your omega-3s. These are so crucial for maintaining brain structure and
Yeah.
function. They help to improve memory, mood stabilization, all of these different things. Not to mention they do help you go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
We certainly don't want you to get constipated, because then you're just reabsorbing all the toxins that are
Mhm.
in the crap, literally. So, that's something. What's one of your favorite foods to help with good gut biome and good cognitive health?
Well, my go-to with the gut microbiome, it is the resistant starches, right? Because it's just something easy. So we already kind of covered that, but whenever, we kind of think of some easy things that you can toss into your lunches, right? Berries, you see the blueberries and the strawberries, right? So they've got lots of antioxidants and flavonoids, right? And so this helps with oxidative stress and reduces inflammation in the brain, right? So then that promotes better mood and cognitive functioning, right? So, berries, right? Now, blueberries may be better for some. Strawberries are something I personally, they're really high in histamine, so I have to avoid them. But I can get away with a blueberry from time to time, right? So, you pick and choose. And I know that leafy greens are something that are mentioned, spinach, kales, those sorts of things. And with that, like something I always want to emphasize is think about your gut and how many, we've covered. There's so much bacteria in there. There's a variety of bacteria. Okay. Do we need to just then focus on one food, right? If spinach is or kale is great, do I just need green powder, green powder, green powder full of these things all the time? No, we still need variety, right? Of these healthy foods, the nuts and seeds, and if you do well with whole grains, right? And so then you're going to end up feeding a wider range of bacteria in your gut because, like you had already covered, we don't want to annihilate all the bad guys. It's not like, if I avoid this food, well, then I can completely starve out said thing. Right now, when we're going through, say, a candida protocol, and we need to kind of drop the carb count lower, keep the sugars gone as we address something that's out of whack. Great, we're going to do that. But then once we get back into balance, we really want to try to maintain balance. And that's, from the health perspective, but then just also a day-to-day functioning, right? I don't know. Raise your hand or put it in the chat if you want to eat just the exact same thing every single day and have no variety in your life, because that's what, honestly, I am that person a little bit, and it's fine. But most people aren't that way, right? They want variety, and there's a lot of really healthy foods out there. Whole foods, that's the first push. Like, just get the processed stuff out of there, and you're going to do some great things for your microbiome. Get rid of the seed oils, right? You're going to start really seeing an improvement in your gut health.
And actually, that answers Dee's question. If you work and fix your leaky gut, would your leaky brain get fixed too, or will you continue to have brain fog conditions? No. If you fix your leaky gut, your leaky brain will get fixed. Will it get fixed totally? Well, that kind of depends. What else is going on? Do you have any heavy metal toxicity? Do you have any parasites? Do you have, any other things that may need to also be addressed besides the leaky gut? That's, it's kind of like that depends type of question. But generally, if you fix the leaky gut, the leaky brain will work. But if you continue to have brain fog, maybe it's not the leaky brain that's causing the brain fog. There might be some other things. But first, clean up the diet. Look at where your toxic load is coming from. That's really going to make a lot of benefits. It's like you want to clear the muddy waters. See what else is going on. Then you can start honing in on, persisting symptoms. And then you can work from there. But get that low-hanging fruit taken care of first, and and take a look at that. Which kind of works into Lydia's question. When I was saying about toxins, she asks, how does mold toxicity affect the gut and brain? Well, when you're talking about mold toxicity, obviously there's different types of mold, and they can significantly impact gut health. So what happens is that it can actually disrupt the gut microbiota itself. Okay, they alter the balance of the gut biome. And how they do that is they can actually kill certain gut bacteria or inhibit the growth of beneficial gut bacteria while allowing pathogenic bacteria to then thrive. So that dysbiosis, that imbalance, can lead to gastrointestinal symptoms like bloating, like diarrhea, like constipation, or back and forth. There's also the fact that it can increase your gut permeability. So this is where it can actually impact and cause leaky gut. And really what ends up happening is the toxins themselves, start to break down and affect that cellular integrity, those tight junctions, and, or trigger a cascade of inflammation that then affects that gut barrier. So, other things, it affects your immune system, and then therefore, leading to that impact on that gut brain axis, because of it disrupts that communication network, and that really starts triggering mood swings, depression, anxiety. Oftentimes, I will have people come to me. Of course, I know myself because I lived in a moldy house for many years. Bad dreams, just irritable, bloody nose, things like this. These are common symptoms for mold toxicity in the body. So That's really important, to try to tease out what is causing your symptoms. But again, always go with the low-hanging fruit first. Control the controllables, change what you can, and if you feel great, fantastic. Maybe that's all you needed. But if you're still feeling awful, then keep digging. And, this is where working with someone really helps. Someone who's seen these kind of symptoms, who's aware of all the different types of things that to look for. So
I kind of just wanted to jump in on that last part where you're saying how it's important to work with someone, because we can take an intake, or people, will supply some information, right, on, their medical history. Okay, I lived in a moldy house, or blah, 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 and we can ascertain a lot from that. But sometimes, and a lot of times, I find with my clients, it is just these offhand remarks that they make during one of our consultations, and I'm like, boom, there it is. There, that's this little thing we've been chasing of why aren't they feeling better? Why are they still struggling with their gut? Why are they having these issues? And that's where just having conversation, like the more time that you have, like think of these webinars, right? Like you get these little gems, you get these little nuggets of information. But like as a clinician, when we're on the other side and we're able to pull out of you and talk with you and hear about your day, and you know, there was flooding at my workplace and they haven't replaced the carpet yet. And then we're like, oh, okay, we need to have a different conversation, and so that's where having someone that you're working with is, it is so important. And again, like how you said, the low hanging fruit, like sometimes it's not fruit that we need to grab, right? Sometimes we have something in our hand, a habit that we need to drop, right? And so that's where cleaning up our habits a little bit, because we're always on that search. I think Western medicine is kind of ingrained in us that like, oh, it's if I have a problem, I need to go find something that's going to fix it. When a lot of times what we need to do is kind of say, okay, are there some habits? Are there some things I'm doing that I can drop off and maybe change or choose to let go of, and see some progress? And then that might alter the path of what I need to then go for, right? Because you may think you need one supplement when really, if you stopped eating the food that was causing you the problem, well, then maybe you didn't need a digestive enzyme. You just were eating this one food that wasn't really working with you. So
Yeah, I have to apologize that I missed a little message that Elizabeth had her hand up. And I would love that if she still has that question, we'd like to bring her forward to ask her question live, if she would be so
yay.
willing to do so.
Yeah, Elizabeth, you should have the opportunity to unmute if you still wanted to ask your question. If you don't want to, that's okay.
She's like, I don't know.
It looks
I
like she
do
might have changed her mind.
apologize.
I think we've got some more
Oh,
questions in the Q&A, but if she changes her mind, she's welcome to unmute.
okay, or if she figures out how to unmute herself if she's not sure and is a little stuck. So, okay, so we've got our eyes and ears open for you, Elizabeth. So anytime, not a problem. All right, so let's jump back over to the Q&A. I've got Cindy saying, with a homozygous bad FUT2, how do you promote lactobacilli and acetophilus? Fermented foods, prebiotic, probiotic, spores, nothing changes results. 50 grams vary, fibers too. Thanks. That's a great question. And for those of you who may not know exactly what she's talking about, so the FUT2 gene, what this does in reference to the gut biome, it actually helps to anchor food and the bacterium itself in the gut biome. And when you have her words, homozygous bad, so a dysregulated gene, definitely not optimal in this case. What's going on is it's not allowing and not keeping hold of the bacterium that we want. So how do we deal with this? So that is your nature, but there's also the nurture part. Now it looks like you've tried a lot of different things. You've tried fermented foods, you've tried prebiotics, probiotics, etc. I would actually want to dig into that a little bit more. It's hard to say nothing changes. Well, what exactly has been tested? How have you followed the numbers? Has it been just subjective? Because I never want to discount how you feel, okay, and the symptoms you have. Or did you actually do a gut biome test? And okay, so you may have been low on your lactobacillus and, you know, some of these others, as you said, your lactobacilli, acidophilus, and what, they were super low. Did the needle move at all when you retook the test to check to see what they are? There's a lot of teasing out I would like to find. I would like to know more about to see how that works. But it's not just that. Remember, I said that there could be other things going on. We need to clear the muddy waters. It looks like you've already started clearing that. So if you're still having those symptoms, then there's a lot more questions I would have. You know, have you taken a total tox burden test, you know, taking a look at what else might be going on that could be affecting your ability to repopulate your gut? You know, there's a lot to look at. So I would say don't give up hope. Just because you have a dysregulated FUT2 gene does not mean that you will never have a decent gut biome. Okay. So again, it's just a matter of teasing out more of the details and asking more questions. So, Elizabeth, it doesn't look like she either wants
Yeah, I
to.
don't think she ever unmuted.
Okay, so
I did want, so there's a question here about probiotics and the best time to take them.
yeah.
And I kind of felt like I would default, I mean, and maybe you have a different opinion, but I would default to the manufacturer's suggestion, right? Because if they have these proprietary ways that they're expecting, you to absorb and be able to utilize the probiotic, they will have ways, they will say how to do that, right? Obviously, fermented food can be eaten anytime. You can have it with a meal or by itself. So just depending on, but when you're thinking about a capsule, because even some probiotics, you'll see them as powders, right? I would just kind of naturally just default to what they're suggesting, because I think that depending on their delivery mechanism, I mean, that they would take that into account when they're advising you. Or do you have any specific recommendations that you give clients when they're taking a probiotic?
Honestly, I lean into what the manufacturer suggests, because
Okay.
it is how they created it. There's a reason for it, for its efficacy. And you want to go with ones that have done the research, that have shown the research, and the few that I mentioned do that. They actually have published papers, on their products and the efficacy of them. So again, lean into the manufacturer, give them a call, ask them the questions. That's what I would do. I see a question in the chat that I wanted to comment on by Dee. She had mentioned how I talked about mold and, mold buildup in the bathroom shower and more serious mold conditions from water damage in the house. How long was the mold cleanup process? That I personally endured. I moved. But I do want to say, if you have mold in your home, of course, it depends on if you're renting, if you own the home. This is something that you really want to address as soon as possible. And not that I'm going to be diving into this too deeply, because, we're focusing on something else right now, but I do want to say that we have interviewed Jason Earl from Got Mold. Actually, I am going to be interviewing him on a podcast soon. So I recommend that you listen to these, learn some more about it. If you do have mold in your home, what do you do? If you are having symptoms, where to start, how to test it. So, but yes, no, I did not do any cleanup. I just moved. So, but thank you for asking.
So I know that we're coming up on our time here.
Yes.
And so how do we, how does everyone just stay connected, right? Like we'll have replays here. What is there's so much good information with you, Dr. Varden. How do we get back to this? And, and if they didn't get their question answered, do we, our next calls kind of, where do we go from here as we kind of wrap this one up?
Well, if there are other questions, burning desires or wanting to know more, you can always contact our client care. Client care at thednacompany.com. We'll have that, Beth drop that in the chat. You can also, please, if you want to learn more on your own, please visit our Instagram, DNA Co. I'm trying to remember all the ones. Hang on.
We will help you out, Dr. Varden.
Beautiful.
Yay.
Thank you. To the rescue.
So, and Julius, please put in the chat window the links to the social media. Also drop in there Brandon's email address, if you would. And then if anybody has questions, they can send Brandon an email. You guys are going to be doing a follow-up to this in a couple of weeks. So please be watching the webinar schedule, and we will have both of these amazing practitioners back in the same place talking about transit time, which AJ know freaks me out on a scale of 1 to 10 of 10. And Dr. Varden finds it funny. So it all works out. Ladies, thank you both very much. Great job, everybody.
All right. And I want to say thank you, everyone. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us, to learn more about your health, your gut, your brain, to be healthier, to be the best you possible. So much appreciation. And I want to thank my brilliant partner in transit time crime, AJ Wilt. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your input. Always a pleasure. Your help, your information is just pearls of wisdom, and we truly appreciate that. So thank you very much. And thank you for all of our angels in the background making all this happen. So until then, have a beautiful day, and we will see you next time.